Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the new moon in Cancer 1. I'm joined here today by my good friend, Sam Belyea. How you doing, Sam? How you doing there, friend?
I am doing well, just playing with some technology of my own, trying to mute the video as it goes live.
Yeah, no
Um,
worries.
yeah, doing good. Just so excited to talk about the best zodiac sign.
Right. Yes, I can't argue with you there. I know that some people in the modern pop astrology would. We get dragged as actually quite often,
Quite a
but
bit.
that's okay. Well, we're here to show you the pros and the cons and have a realistic viewpoint. So thank you everyone for joining us here today. If you are joining us in the live chat here today, feel free to put a comment in the chat box. Let us know where you're stopping in from. I'm looking at people joining us. We've got Remco here from the Netherlands. Rachel is here stopping by, I believe, from Ireland. Andrea is here from Croatia. Sam is saying hi, like Meta saying hi in the chat. Lynn is here from Vermont. So thank you so much, friends, all of you, for joining us. I love how cosmopolitan and international this crowd is that we have here. And I hope that we'll be able to guide you today and bring maybe some peace of mind and some challenging times. Sam, we're going through some stuff here already, aren't we?
So much stuff.
Yeah, it's a little bit heavy. It was a little bit. This talk might be a little heavier than I originally anticipated, but I think that hopefully our Cancerian sensitivity is going to be able to bring us through it. So I'm seeing a few more people stopping in. Morton Wild here. Hello, friend, is stopping in from Somerset, UK. Welcome. And another fellow Cancerian is dropping by. Rachel is here as well. So, Sam, introduce yourself to our audience here. You have been on the show before, and I have to say, I really enjoyed our talk the last time you were here. Like you really. I knew you were talented, but I was really surprised at the depth of your knowledge, and it was one of my favorite shows. So I just wanted to give you that compliment right away. So
Oh, right in the feels. So thank you for having me on again, Spencer. I just absolutely adore being able to chat with you and to kind of give content to the community that you've created. For those of you who have not seen the previous episode, go check that out for more Spencer Sam dialogue. But if you would like to follow me, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I got pretty famous for doing a daily horoscope where I break down the daily astro weather as well as do kind of a 1 or 2 line snippet for people who don't like the astro babble. And I also teach astrology, do consultations, do a lot of intuitive work, a lot of body work as well as where my background is in. Yeah, I'm just happy to be here.
yeah, and you're joining us from Florida. Is that right? Are you still
Yep.
out of Florida?
Yep.
Cool.
Tampa, Florida, mid-state.
Okay. And you have a interesting class you were telling me about that is coming up.
Oh yeah. So one of the things that I'm working on right now, all of my fellow gardeners will just absolutely love this. I'm working on a magical gardening class, which will be a year-long monthly class that's totally online, and it's entitled Magical Gardening: Growing Through the Zodiac. Where we'll be looking at the different planets, the different signs, the different myths behind them, spiritual practices, ritual, and magical things that we can do to connect with the lands, to connect with different archetypes of spirit and ourselves. So that's the thing I'm chewing on right now.
Very cool. Yeah, that is speaking to my Cancer Sun, Taurus Moon heart here. So that sounds like a very cool class. I was, when you told me about this a little earlier, I was like, whoa, that sounds very, very cool. So check that out on Sam's website. What is your website that we can find you on, Sam?
It's just sambelyea.com.
Okay, so check out sambelyea.com, Garden Through the Zodiac, which I think is maybe getting our hands into the dirt and grounding ourselves might be really important as we move forward through what may be a challenging year or times ahead, I think, on some level here for sure. Yeah, and if you want to support some of the projects I've got in the hopper as well, I have my Decans of Cancer webinar that's coming up on July the 16th. So there is a link in the description of this video or wherever you are consuming this content to sign up for that and register for that. I look forward to working with all of you there. We're going to go over some of the deep dive in cancer, a lot of the things that we talk about today. But if you want to get a more in-depth conversation with all things Cancerian, tarot, Decans, myth, all of those things, that's the place to find it for my take on it. You can also sign up for the email list if you want to know when we're doing these live streams, and if you want to be able to figure out when new classes are coming along. So the business stuff here. Also today, the last thing I'll say is the best thing you can do is just being here with your presence today. So I really appreciate all of you here. But a huge favor that you can do us today is hitting the like button on this video. That helps this message get out to the more people into the algorithm. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel. And if you feel so inclined and want to make a material donation to the work that we're doing here today, there's a little $ in the chat box. It's called a super chat or a super sticker, or you can make a donation at buymeacoffee.com. All right, business stuff has been taken care of. We've got a few more friends stopping by, Sam. I want to give them a shout out. Aligning Light Astrology, Dr. Claire Moon is here. Joining us from southern Wisconsin. So I'm happy to see you here as well. And Jenny Kane is also joining us from Wisconsin. So our Wisconsin crew is here today. Go Packers, go Bucks. And my grandparents are from Milwaukee. And if you know anything about Cancerians, not all Cancerians are sports fans, but all Cancerians have something that they're loyal to, probably from their childhood, whatever it is, or a fond memory that they are continually want to bring back into their life. Do you have anything like that, Sam?
Pokemon, 100%, no hesitation.
There you go. Perfect. Good memories that we've attached to it, like, oh, that's my happy place, right? Very, very nice. Okay. All right. So Sam, let's start diving into this new moon that we have here. We're going to be experiencing, and I'll pull the chart up in a second, but our new moon is going to be on June the 28th at 10:52 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time at 7 degrees of Cancer. We have a square with Jupiter in Aries. The moon is out of bounds. We'll talk about all these things, but big picture thoughts about this lunation, where we're at astrologically, culturally, what is crossing your mind about all this right now?
There's so much happening, not just because of the Jupiter new moon square, but also because it's happening within the context of having Mercury and Venus in Gemini. And also we have this kind of spread of the chart where certain planets are only able to see other planets visually. And so we're getting half the story in some cases, and there are certain boons like Venus making a sextile to Jupiter. That's really, we'll talk about that with the mythology of Nike. This concept of everybody's got strength in different places. We just might not be able to access the same strengths as other people right now. But I think as a whole, the new moon is really sensitizing us. It's asking us to sensitize, to be in a certain amount of pain and shedding and vulnerability right now, and allowing that to be what it is, and to not try to shell or guard away from that, but instead to allow that to inspire action. A lot of people forget that although Cancer is a water sign and cries at the drop of a hat and is super sensitive and very heart focused, we are still cardinal, baby. We are still action-oriented leaders that want to inspire a moving forward. And sometimes that means sitting in your feelings with the most awareness and sponging everything in.
And we're not pushovers either. Is what people need to get.
We are people pleasers, not pushovers. There is a difference.
That's true. I am guilty of that. I will say that we are sensitive and nurturing until the people we really care about are threatened, and then pray for you.
I tell all of my clients that when a Cancer is angry, it's mama bear.
Right.
It's aggressive. The claws are sharp. There is an amount of weight behind it that is just so intense. And people are like, where did this come from? Yeah. It's like, it's been under the shell the whole time, buddy.
It's instinctual. It's like this, it's this raw force that can get tapped into. And I think that's one of my big picture thoughts with this, I think, is that in the news with the Supreme Court ruling that we are all processing, I think at this point, that has touched a nerve, I think, in not only in America, but around the world, about personal sovereignty and about the body, which the moon is related to, and our rights regarding that. And I think that we're seeing this mama bear energy has risen, and people are like surprised at where is this coming from? It's like, well, like you said, it's been there, and it's being tapped into. And I find that really fascinating, as how we can harness that towards I don't know, towards movement, towards utilizing that energy in a way that can be productive, and actually maybe change the tide towards maybe back towards equality, autonomy, and things of that nature. So that was something that Sam and I were discussing earlier too, is how do we direct this energy that has been awakened for the good of the whole, and in the most efficient and effective way possible as well, right?
And I love that all of this is happening while we have Mercury in Gemini and Venus in Gemini, spreading the word, putting it on every news channel. Every social media platform is just buzzing about it, so that when you have conversations with people that you're close to, and you expose their beliefs, their pain, their struggle about what's happening right now, it induces a productive dialogue. And sometimes that means mama bear slits your throat and you don't get back up.
Yeah.
And that's justified, but other times that means having a bonding and a connection and a rallying together, because that kind of Gemini energy is spreading the word and kind of getting the word out through those wavelengths.
Yeah. And a couple of things, just technically, this new moon is on a fixed star called Mirzum, which is called the announcer. So like it's all about making proclamations and announcements, but before something more intense happens, because Mirzum was a fixed star that came before Sirius in Canis Major, which was a very important fixed star about the return of fertility to the Nile River Valley. So maybe this is, studying Taoism and spirituality and some of these wisdom traditions. A lot of the time, things feel the darkest before the dawn, right? And maybe this is something that is a spark, to make a change that is much bigger. I don't know. Do you feel that energy too, about how we find balance throughout this?
I feel like right now, although Jupiter in Aries is pushing for a lot of action, pushing for a lot of explosive incitement and aggressive and warlike feelings, when Mars and Jupiter conjoined in Aries, that was such a powder keg. That was such just a debauchery of fire. I think this new moon in Cancer is really just asking us to step into that vulnerability and to cry and to sob and to feel grief, and to let that grief be shared in an authentic way. But that doesn't necessarily need to be turned into or transmuted into action at this time. It needs to sink in. People need to feel that vulnerability, because if you don't feel that completely, then change cannot occur internally. You're going to be guarding or kind of deflecting some of that needed sensitivity, some of that needed nerve stimulation. One of the things that we talk about in body work as well is that you should never try to get rid of your pain. You should always try to partner with it, to understand it, to let it guide you towards the feedback that you need in order to change the diet, move differently, see a different care provider, instead of just saying, well, this has to go away. At this point, it can't go away. It's here. But if you don't lean into it completely, then you're not going to have the internal impetus to make the action long term.
Yeah, and that's something we'll get into with the I-Ching today too, because the I-Ching, we have a hexagram 11 moving to 57, peace moving to gentle penetration, they call it, which is reflective of the wind, and the need to maybe utilize our action-orientated impetus in a way that is for the long term, rather than maybe burning ourselves out like those Aries planets may be apt to do, where this solution, the problem has been coming for a long time. Like the people that are in favor of the actions that have been taking place in the last week or so have been planning this for decades. And we're getting to the point where all of that corruption is starting to rise to the surface, and it's going to take time to like maybe unravel that potentially, and to hopefully return us back to a state of equilibrium. So yeah, I mean, sometimes you have a problem that didn't happen overnight, and the solution doesn't happen overnight either, right? And I think that I've been thinking about just like how to sustain the energy that's necessary to be able to create lasting change that everyone I think is hoping for on some level. So yeah, a lot to process. Sit with your feelings. It isn't lost on me either, Sam, that some of that news came out during like a last quarter balsamic moon phase, and now we have to kind of sit, process, and then there may be some new actions after we've processed that at the new moon that unfold over that lunar cycle as well, right?
Yeah. When we look at the lunar cycle of the summer, like we have the sensitizing Cancer moon that pulls us into the feelings, into the most yin part of us during the hottest time of the year. Yeah. But then we have the full moon in Capricorn, which is just like, okay, feelings are done, action is now. And it is slow and sustainable action up the hill. It's doing the tough things, the harvests, the dirty work that Capricorn thrives on, the struggle, of the tortoise as opposed to the sprint of the hare. But if we don't allow if we don't allow the suffering to consume us during the Cancer new moon, and to allow that to penetrate and to shape the work that we will be doing from here on out, then the new moon is lost on us.
I think composure is the word that just comes up, right?
Well, but not confusing composure with that false mask of everything is okay, everything's going to be okay.
That's a good point. Yeah, have the ugly cry, and then right, and then compose yourself. Yeah.
There was a TikTok creator who unfortunately had their 18-year-old child on the eve of his 19th birthday taken away from her. Mm-hmm. And it was right around the Roe v. Wade announcement. And it was just, as I was reflecting on this talk about the new moon, it was the perfect example of how to be just in grief and in solidarity with people who are hurting, and the maternal aspect and understanding, now would be a great time to reevaluate the pain of the mother and what that means. Because I don't know about you, but my family wasn't the best growing up. And so having this dialogue, this discussion about what it means to be in that yin form of feminine pain, and honoring that and really making space for that. And that cannot come with external distractions. It has to be a fully internal process. It's not something you can really share easily, but that's kind of where we're at.
Well, that Cancerian backstory seems to be, I've seen this a lot in clients. There's a reason why I think a Cancer sun, or people that have very prominent Cancer placements, desire to bring nurturing to others. A lot of it is because they didn't receive that themselves, and they realize that they have to learn to create it for themselves. And it's through some of the trauma, I think, that informs the empathy to be able to care for others. It's not true for every single Cancerian person, but more often than not, I've seen that there's something that's like in there that triggers it. And this brings me back to, I was talking about this with Melissa LaFara. I was on her podcast recently to talk about Cancer season, and I talked about Mike Tyson a little bit. And Mike Tyson's a Cancerian, and he he started fighting when he was younger because he was taking care of these pigeons. He has these pigeons that he takes care of, like now, and like because he's wealthy and he has thousands of pigeons that he cares for, that he knows all their names and everything. Like literally, like I think he has like a warehouse full of pigeons. But he had a few when he was growing up, and a friend, not a friend, a what would you call it? A tormentor took one of his pigeons, ripped its head off, and threw it at him, and that was the impetus for his first fight. So one of the things that's really bringing out to me is that the Cancerian archetype would rather, I think, avoid fighting. I don't think that that's our natural state of like, we'd rather just go off and do our own thing and sidestep issues. But like Achilles, who is another archetype of Cancer, I think, when something that we love and care about is taken away from us, that can be the impetus for the Cancerian person to look around and be like, all right, no one else is going to do this. I'm going to step up and I'm going to fight with every inch of my body, like Mike Tyson did, like, Rocky Balboa in the Rocky movies, who's another Cancerian archetype with Sylvester Stallone. And I just find that really fascinating because it just really speaks to the ability to tap into that instinctual protective force, right? I mean, that's something that we really don't think about as much with Cancer. We think about it as a mother, but the protection aspect of it. And I think that we are being called to action. Like society just ripped the head off our pigeon right now and threw it at us. So I think that it's like, if that doesn't get you to step into the ring and whatever that looks like, for you, doesn't have to look like the same for everybody. There are many roles to play in challenging times. And but to me, that was something that was like, wow, that's a really interesting story, because you look at Mike Tyson, he went through all sorts of terrible stuff, and he did some very terrible things too, but I won't erase any of that from memory. But you look at him and you're like, man, this guy, he's really a dichotomy. Like, he's so dangerous. Do you know what I mean? He's one of the most dangerous individuals in sports ever. But he also seems like he has this very sensitive, nurturing, caring side. And that paradox is something that it's always fascinated me with Cancer in particular. Okay, so Sam, I'm looking at the chat, and we'll pull up the chart here in a second, but Andrea says, so true, my brother is a triple Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, and gets into mama bear energy, especially these days as a father and a Cancer. You and your brother and me both, Andrea. Like, mothers, women, children have always been important to him. Yeah, I have an adult, a newly minted adult daughter who is now of reproductive age, and this is something that I've been feeling like since that judgment came down with Roe v. Wade being eliminated. I've been feeling just very protective of my daughter, and not that I wasn't before, but it's the one act that gets you to be like, like, because at the end of the day, a lot of Cancerians would just rather just be like sitting on their porch, watching the birds or drinking a lemonade or something like that. I think most of us would prefer that on some level, wouldn't we? Like, just being able to have peace in our lives and go about our lives peacefully without conflict. Maybe the Aries folks in the audience would disagree, but I don't know. And Rachel says that rings true, Spencer. Very often carrying Cancerian instinct comes after really going deep and sitting with one's own pain and then needing to act. 100%. I love that Sam is bringing that up and being able to sit with that pain and trauma to get clear on, just to feel it. Like, this is the transition between Gemini and Cancer. It's not even just a mental thought thing. It's a heart thing. You have to sit with it in your body, the moon, right? In the gut. And Raven, who is, I believe, also a Cancerian, says some people forget crabs have claws. That's right. Don't pinch your little pinchies. And then Remco says, I believe also Remco is a Cancer too. Like, this is a Cancerian audience today. Like, amen to that. The urge to stand up and fight in protection when waters boil over is so real. Absolutely, Remco. Okay, Sam, I'm going to pull this chart up here and let's take a look at this here. A couple other things I'm noticing, Sam, is that we have, you were talking about, here we're looking at the chart of June 28th, 2022, the exact time of our new moon. You were talking about many planets that are kind of spread out over the zodiac, some of them witnessing one another, some of them not. And in traditional astrology, that witnessing quality is really important for them to be able to have a conversation with one another. And I'm noticing too, we've got 4 planets in their own home energy domiciles, right? With the moon, Mercury, Mars, and Saturn. So there's a very pure expression of very different wills, right? What do you think about that with all this stack up here like that?
So I love that the new moon cannot see the rationality of Saturn. Like Saturn in Aquarius retrograde is just so so mentally focused on rules and how games can be played and mental kind of codifications. And Cancer is just like not even on the same page as that. But who is on that is Mercury. Mercury is getting ready to apply to that strong trine with Saturn and getting ready to discuss what are the legislative options, what are the conversations that need to be had. And even Mars got a sextile from Saturn a couple days before the new moon. Just Saturn saying, just stop, just slow down. And of course, Mars will hear that as he enters Taurus and pump those brakes. And hopefully that will be a good grinding halt to some of this kind of aggressive Aries. But I also love that in the midst of all of the 7-degree square between Jupiter and the new moon, in comes Venus at 7 degrees, applying to a sextile with Jupiter to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. We don't need to spearhead a revolt. We don't need to take a single-pointed, militaristic cannon blast of an action at this time. No one thing is going to create that lasting change. Instead, Venus in Gemini says options abound. Let's reframe this. Let's look at this another way. Let's discuss what we can do, where we can move, what pieces are on the board, zooming out and zooming through the different kind of pages, perspectives, and facets of the diamond that is our reality right now. Whereas new moon in Cancer is basically just in its feels and cannot see that behind the scenes dialogue, cannot see that exchange between the air signs and how the air signs are trying to influence the fiery explosion, the venting that is Jupiter and Aries.
I love that. I love that that's, the fact-finding missions, right? The collecting of information to be able to have some kind of objective perspective moving forward, because what the Cancerian moon is speaking to, as you were pointing out, Cancer is not a very objective sign. We are many things, but objective is probably not the first word to describe us. So we're probably one of the most subjective signs, because we're just like, this is so personal. We take everything personally. So, and in turn, whenever we have the sun and the moon moving through a sign, the collective starts to reflect some of those, values. And people are pointing out in the chat here about America being a Cancerian country. And I think that, we've got a large European audience here today, but America has a big effect on the world, obviously. And not that I'm trying to, how do I not sound like an American isolationist, but also talk about the universality of the things that we're going through here, right? There is I'm losing my train of thought here. There's a subjectivity, there we go, back to American ideology that is very compartmentalized on some level. I was seeing people pointing out that because we had people coming here from other countries, some of them willingly, others forced, there's these very different sects of kind of SECT of different ideologies. And sometimes it's very hard to merge those together into one unified ideology. And it feels like that's what we're seeing here today. is just some of these extreme positions, subjective positions, and then how do we return to a more objective place? And I will also point out that we're going through the Pluto return, one of the exact hits of the Pluto return to America's chart as well. But I like that you're pointing out that we do have one thing that we can look at in this chart that could be supportive with Venus and Jupiter. I'm a little nervous about Mars moving into Taurus in particular, because it's going to be eventually throughout the end of July applying to a conjunction with Uranus and the North Node.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, Saturn is in the overcoming position to Mars, so it does have some power over Mars right now. And one of the things that I talked about in my July forecast, there was an I-Ching that came up about shock. And this, I didn't know what it was at the time, but now I do. Like it talked about shock that would reduce us to immobility. It says shock, then mud. So to me, you could see it in the chart. You've got the shock, and then you've got Mars moving into Taurus, which is like we feel stuck. And one of the things that I've been working through the last few days, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on how to get out of this position. I think that my first reaction and my partner's first reaction was depression. You know, it was just how sweet, just so sad. I woke up that morning before that news came out, and this is another thing about being Cancerian. Sometimes you feel things before they are rational, and I felt so depressed in the morning, like I just could barely get out of bed that day. And then that news came out, and I was like, oh man. And we've been talking about how sad and how like depressed we are about the state of things. And how do you get past that stuck position where you're losing hope, and how do you return to hope in that regard?
Yeah, so we have to go back to the fundamental trait of Cancer, which is giving care.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways that I personally overcome a lot of depressive episodes is by offering service to others. That could be through volunteer work, that could be through, I know it seems counterintuitive because when you are feeling down, you don't necessarily feel like you have the space to be there for somebody who is also going through a hard time. But one of the things that Cancers do is we immediately are able to transmute our worst heaviness for the sake of someone else.
Sure.
And so I find that servitude is really the best way to kind of move forward. And in some ways, this is where I'm going to jump on the side of that Jupiter in Aries and ask people to embody righteous action.
Right.
So as you start to get into that place of feeling defeated and feeling like there is no light left in the room, you know, the best way that you can move forward is to spark action in a way that really reignites your personal ability to feel motivated and like you are contributing to the conversation. So we talked about this before, the idea that some people's righteous action will be on the streets. Some people will be in the middle of protests and riots and fighting the warrior's fight.
Right.
However, some of that may manifest in the boardroom, some of that may manifest in the family, some of that may manifest in positions of power, or just talking with neighbors, spreading the word, and having deeper discussions. So I think, again, the way that we go from that yin to that yang is as simple as going from water to fire. We just have to raise our temperature a little bit, but raise it in a way that is constructive. Often, if you have a spiritual practice, asking for where that energy can go. One of the things that I talk about a lot with anger and depression is that they're both emotions that don't have an outlet. Right. Depression is having the feelings, but having nothing to do with them. And then anger is the radicalized version of that, holding on to feelings where it's like, I'm just so frustrated because you can't make the moves that you want. So in those two cases, the best thing to do is to discharge in a healthy way, in a supportive way, in a caregiving way, and embody cardinal water.
Yes. And I think that the square that we're seeing, which I think is one of the most poignant relationships in this new moon between Jupiter and Aries and the new moon, And it's pretty close. I mean, it's
Yeah.
within a couple minutes here. It's really fascinating to me to see how reflective of this time period that square in particular is. You know, we've got a first decan of Cancer, which reflects how we nurture others, how the relationships that we form with others to bring nurturing about. And you've got the first decan of Aries, which is really about separating, individuating, saying this is me and this is not me. You know, this kind of like severing, separating energy, martial energy, and having, you know, that conflict come up in regards to women's rights, mothers' rights, things like that is just, it's just a really interesting reflection. I wanted to point out too that, you know, in Hellenistic astrology, that overcoming planet sometimes can have a lot more power over the planets that it's making contact with. So to me, that gives us a little bit of a clue as to what kind of energy we may expect. I always look at Jupiter as like it's the actions that would bring honor and merit, you know, because it is of the solar sect. It says, okay, we are aware of what we need to do to create order on some level. Jupiter is a planet of order to me, actually, because Zeus was like overthrowing the old order and bringing peace to the land. So now Jupiter, to bring peace to the land, has to say, no, we have this, you know, we have this sovereignty. We have the ability to have a say when it comes to our own autonomy and things of that nature. So maybe it will take a little bit of getting the Cancerian waters boiling a little bit. But again, I think both Sam and I have been trying to point out that there's many different roles that can take on, and we don't want to burn ourselves out in the short term because this is a long-term fight. I mean, here's an example. Say you got really pissed off about this and you went and you went to a protest, and then you expended all of your energy, and then you went home and then you didn't do anything afterwards. I mean, that's one act, and it's an important act, but at the same time, it might not be enough long term to actually make realistic change, right?
Yeah. So like everybody's talking right now about over July 4th weekend, like July 4th weekend is canceled because of lack of independence. And I love that.
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
absolutely love that.
Yeah.
And so everybody's like, well, yeah, sure, you could boycott companies, you could not shop, you could not travel, not celebrate that weekend.
Yeah.
But then what?
Right.
And one of the other things that we can't forget about Jupiter is that Jupiter has long been associated with religion and faith and spirituality. And so this idea of kind of warrior-based righteousness is also part of that dynamic of the divine feminine being suppressed by the religious masculine structures of that kind of really souring historical theme, and how we choose to take that conflict and understand that these uprisings have not just now effects, but these are echoes of things that have happened over hundreds of years. This is not a new game, you know, it's just a new face. And so looking at the long-term action that we need to take, a lot of that comes from deep pain, deep injustice, and allowing that to be felt completely so that we can make a more sustainable shift. We can regrow our shell in a new form that is more suited to the dynamics at play.
Yeah, and I don't think it's lost on a lot of people that it's not just women's reproductive rights that are under attack and under threat. I mean, we literally had a Supreme Court justice make a statement about reevaluating gay marriage, reevaluating contraception rights. It's a lot to process, and this is something I've been kind of getting. Not that I didn't have any idea of how this was affecting everyone else, but I've been getting a crash course in the last few days about the scope of it and trying to really wrap my head around the scope of what this really means when we take away the fundamental right of someone being able to manage their own body, and how that can lead to even darker. I mean, I don't know how it gets much darker than that, but it can lead to just even more trauma, and more regressive taking away of personal sovereignty and rights and whatnot.
Yeah. When we
So,
look at this happening during Pride Month as well,
yeah,
huge slap in the face, because the Stonewall riots were started by transgender women of color.
right, right.
And this idea of bricks being thrown, that literal Jupiter and Aries energy, that fire, that heat, the ability to change your body as you see fit, the ability to kind of create life in a maternal sense, but also create your own life, be your own person, to have your shell and to not be criticized by it, to be yourself in essence. And this whole idea of the multitude of communities that are being affected by the rippling of these decisions is the layers of metaphor are just right in front of us.
Well, and let me also point out that Mars and Pluto are now applying to a
True.
square as well. And I think one of the things that is really making me so frustrated and angry about this is that a lot of the arguments that are made by people that are in favor of the ruling that we saw this week are because of protecting life, but yet there are such a failing of taking care of the life that's been born, and such a failing of providing infrastructure to help people to be able to take care of those children that they inevitably now are going to be, some of them, forced to bring into the world. I think that's the thing that frustrates and angers me the most, and realizing that it's just really an instrument of power and control, and that's what I see with this Mars Pluto square.
Mhm.
Is we have this action that is exposing the corruption of the governmental system, the very structures that we have been relying on, quote unquote, for hundreds of years, that we have been fed as a mythology around what it means to be American.
Great word.
Right? it's and as I think that all of that has started to become systematically stripped away as I've gone from a young person to a person in my early 40s. And it's happened in a very layered way. Like I think that growing up in the 80s, there is a certain myth about America's role in the world that was crammed down your throat in school, and like history and all these things. And that little by little, as you become more aware of what that means in the global context, it becomes harder and harder to continue to reconcile it. And we're at the point now where how does anybody reconcile it unless they're actively trying to oppress or suppress somebody, and they're not even hiding that anymore, which is, I don't know, they're not even trying to pretend like they're doing it, so, right?
Well, I think one of the things that I love about looking at transits is that every aspect is two aspects. So
Yeah.
with this Pluto Mars square, right, we have the past as represented by Pluto and Capricorn retrograde, the idea of that heavy, old underworld, the old guard, right? Squaring life as we know it, the ability to move forward, the motivation to succeed, to forge our own paths through Mars and Aries. But then again, flipping that into the same but opposite, we have the mighty dead of our history, the people who made positive change in Pluto as well. They are part of our story too. And Mars, the aggressive, the oppressing, the warmongering type masculine forces that are at work right now, the white patriarchy of this scenario, it becomes a question of what are you fueling your moving forward with? When we look at traditional Chinese medicine, the idea of the element of wood and earth fueling that fire, that combustion. So are you using outdated fuel? Like, are you basing your ability to navigate life, to move forward, to find passion and meaning on the backs of people that died for the wrong reasons? Or are you choosing to associate yourself with an ancestral lineage that is about unity, inclusion, and moving together as a society?
Yeah, it's I in my processing of this news, I posted I apologize for my Instagram vibe the other day, but I posted a picture of the Supreme Court like just rotting as zombies with a very intense like Mars Volta track behind it talking about, you know, their words as fecal in origin.
Yeah.
And it feels like, you know, that decay of Pluto, that rotting institution that isn't really serving the collective anymore. I mean, we have a court that was appointed by, you know, a very minority, right? A minority of, it's not what the majority of the public wants. That's the thing that really is starting to really grate at me, is that you had a president that was elected not by the popular vote, that was able to stack the court in his particular extremist viewpoint. You know, in this very short period of time, the long-term damage that was done. And it feels like that entire branch of the government has become somewhat delegitimized. And it was pointed out by my partner that they passed a law regarding gun rights and the ability to carry, open carry.
Right.
Before they released this Roe v. Wade retraction, which also is a clear message to me that they are willing to arm people to be able to uphold whatever this extreme ideology is, right? And this is what this I got the conch today as my animal of the day. That's different than the animal for this new moon. But the conch is about sounding the alarm bell. So I apologize if I'm sounding the alarm bell too loud here, but I want to make it clear that if you care about this issue, I want you to be very careful out there right now, because the people that don't care about this issue, that are trying to uphold white supremacy and things of that nature, have been preparing for this type of moment by arming themselves to, they want violence. Do you know what I'm saying? They are craving it. And I kind of want to make that clear, that the right doesn't care like about the violence. They want it, you know? And I feel, and I'm sorry if I'm being too blunt about it today, but I'm worried about my friends out there on the front lines of protest. And I hope that we can make that message clear of what we want in a way that is, I don't know, peaceful but strong. Does that make sense? How can you help me out here, Sam?
Well, so we talked about this a little bit before, but the idea of it's a very different strategy to meet Mars in Aries and Jupiter in Aries head on.
Yeah.
From a Cancerian perspective, you will lose.
Yep.
Your water will boil, water will evaporate, and you will be left as a scorched earth.
Exactly.
However, you know, what Cancer does very well, is connection. And so I am personally taking a lot of faith in seeing how this is a world issue. Like America as the mythology of the superpower, and how it's being viewed across the world, what we're doing right now, and the fact that it is being looked at so poorly. And so many nations are realizing that, hey, America, are you okay? And we can actually stand up and say, with our Cancer new moon, like, no.
No, we're not. Absolutely,
Not okay.
we are not. And we tried to pretend that we were for a long time. We tried to project how functional we were, how affluent we were, how much we were able to protect other people and things of that nature. And it's okay. It is hard to admit, even as a Cancerian person on the microcosm, when I'm not feeling very well, because you want to be strong for others. So I can understand that impulse. But, you know, we're at a point now where what it really boils down to, Sam, on a global scale, is, are we going to be able to preserve democracy, or are we going to fall into authoritarianism? I think that's really what this boils down to as far as a bigger issue. It's not just about women's reproductive rights. It is about authoritarian control versus democratic, elections, and being able to have a voice as a community.
Mm-hmm. And I love the idea of, when we look at the 4 cardinal signs, we have family, we have business or professionalism, we have war, and we have justice. And these are the 4 corners of our ring right now. And, you know, Cancer's at home. Cancer's circling the wagons and trying to soothe the hearts and bodies of those that are disrupted by this. And, you know, Aries is marching onto the battlefield, and Capricorn is trying to stabilize the economy, and Libra is trying to rewrite legislation. And all of them are trying to use their cardinality at different points for different purposes, using different powers. But at the same time, it's not just us. We are not alone in the story that's being told right now. And I think that part of that darkness, part of that depression, part of that defeatedness is when we start to think, well, I can't do anything about this, or nothing can be done. And really the solution is connection.
Well, and you bring up a good point about utilizing the skill set that you have. Like, we have a circle here of wholeness, and there's different divisions of that. And there's different roles that people are playing within this collective. And another thing I think I would point out too is that oftentimes, and I think I admitted to this earlier, it's easy for a Cancerian to instinctually want to shut out the world until something personal happens to them. And while I don't think that Americans in general have ignored like the conflict with Russia and Ukraine, because it is having an effect on America, inflation, all of those things. I think that this type of thing has triggered this more of a righteous response, because it hits a little bit closer to quote unquote home. Yeah. And that's something to be aware of with Cancerian energy too, is, you know, it's easy to like just stick your head in the sand and be like, oh, well, I'm okay. But like, and I've been guilty of this. I really try to check that part of myself quite often, because it's easy to do. Sometimes you have to do it for your own survival, but if you overdo that, you can just completely become like, you know, lost in privilege and lost in like ignoring what's going on in the world. But as I have come to realize with environmentalism on some level, I tried to buy a farm not too long ago, and because I wanted to escape the world. It was the Cancerian tendency to want to escape and live in some kind of utopia that doesn't really exist. This is the other thing about America, is there's this utopia we are trying to attain from the past that never existed. You know, like this I believe Liz Green and Eric Neumann, who she's quoting, call it Ouroboros incest. This longing to return to this golden age that is only created in the mind. It's not not really based on anything real. And in my story with trying to buy this farm, we ended up, the well that we would have been drinking from ended up being half a mile down the stream from a toxic waste dump. Like, right, where people were polluting, had in the 70s had dumped 2,500 barrels of toxic like paint thinners in this like lady's farm, and it was still there, and it was still flowing into the water. And I found like this failed water test, but long story short, it showed me that you cannot escape this. There is nowhere to hide, you know. And that to me was a realization that, hey, you know what? You've got to try to do your best to make where you are, when you are, the best it possibly can be. There's no like other place that anybody is going to be able to go. There's not going to be, you can't move to Canada and expect like all your problems to go away. you know, which, you know, like it's, and I think that that's the thing too. Instead of feeling like, I know a lot of people are probably feeling this right now, like, oh, I want to move, you know, I want to leave this country. And I've had that instinct sometimes. But it's just, no matter where you go, the forces of oppression and authoritarianism will find you. And you have to work on that as a community. And this is, and here's the turnaround. You know, one thing I've seen since this beyond all the righteous, very righteous indignation, has been people offering up different ways to, like, you know, be able to attain the same bodily rights that they had before. You know, all of these outside the box thinking, like with getting mail order, like day after pills and things of that nature. Like there's people that are already starting to mobilize and say, well, now that this has happened, how do we band together as a community to support one another? I saw like a sporting goods store said, we will fund, you know, I was really surprised. Dick's
Sporting Goods.
Right. We'll shout them out, because when corporations like that are doing things like, we need to name them. Like Dick's Sporting Goods is like, we'll pay like $5,000 if you had your reproductive rights taken away in your state to go to another state. And I was like, wow, that kind of thing does give me hope, because those are the types of actions where you're banding together and supporting each other in your local communities, even if the bigger systemic forces are bearing down on you oppressively, right?
Yeah. And it's, again, it's not a new story. Like, this has been told in every myth, you know, the rise of these forces clashing with each other. One of the things that I loved about your synopsis, Spencer, as we were kind of talking about the notes, is one of the animals associated with this new moon being the scarab, a beetle who literally makes the best of a shitty situation, and literally brings life from the decay of other people and uses it as both food and fuel to nourish the next generation. And I think that resourcefulness is not an excuse for the taking away of this dream of the kind of ideal home situation, but understanding that connecting with archetypes that have also been struck down. Another one that you talked about in your notes was Medusa, she who is the patroness of all victimized women, and her aegis, her shield, gifted by Athena. All of those type of archetypes, all of those forces of anti-oppression, they're all around us all the time, and we can spiritually connect with them throughout this journey.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue for talking about the daimon, or spirit of Cancer 1, all right, which we see reflected in the Two of Cups here, which is a Venus ruled decan. It's about partnership. It's about awareness of desire, emotional awareness of the other, right? We call this Sephira in the Kabbalistic tree of life, Chokmah, which is sort of that flash of insight, of emotional insight. But we're dealing with a deity called Nike in Cancer 1. And you had some really great thoughts on Nike and her role, the winged goddess of victory. Tell us more about Nike, Sam.
Yeah, so she's a very Mercury Hermes figure, except she's associated with Athena. And when we look at her role and her kind of matronization, it's often associated with all forms of victory, whether that's sports or whether that's legislation. It is she who wins and the wings of victory. And Nike is obviously swift, just like Hermes. She is a winged creature. And she is often pictured holding the caduceus, the staff of Hermes. So also victory over illness and victory over medical issues. So might be a more appropriate figure, as opposed to, like, if you're used to working with Saint Expedus, that idea of working for quick resolution, Nike might be a better figure at this time to look at victory both in legislation over the feminine presenting face of the divine, but also the idea of swiftness in all forms of winning.
Yeah, giving us that strength to to battle or to fight, right, on some level. Raven is saying, I don't know, I'm not sure if it's mentioned, but the scarab beetle has been used as imagery for the sign of Cancer in ancient Egypt. Yeah, Sam was pointing that out, Raven. And the scarab beetle is that a reflection of the immortality, because the scarab beetle is like a dung beetle, right? It would push this ball of like poo like around, and it was actually they would lay their eggs in it, and the life would just emerge from it. So it reflected the journey of the sun across the sky, like the scarab beetle pushing that circular, life-giving entity, because life would just emerge from this sphere that they were pushing around. So it's definitely an interesting way of thinking about Cancer as well. And of course, Cancer is the ascendant of the Thema Mundi. It is a place of unity between body and spirit. I believe it was also called the gate of life, where spirits would come into this existence on some level, where Capricorn was the gate of death or something of that nature. So it is a fertile place where things can be nurtured. There's a transition between Gemini and Cancer, where I feel like Gemini is about choice, exploration for choice. And now Cancer says, well, here is, you figured out what is important to you. Now you have to nurture that to its full fruition, right? Okay, Sam. So one other thing, did we talk about the moon being out of bounds at all on this?
No, go for it.
Yeah, so that's another thing that I was noticing with this new moon and with the full moon in Capricorn that's coming up, is there's a condition called out of bounds that I've been tracking recently, which it's related to the declination of the sun, the path of the sun. So I'm just going to make a drawing here, Sam, for our audience here. So this is the path of the sun. Okay, here's the horizon line, and this is the path of the sun. You've got the ecliptic. Okay, let's call this the ecliptic. Okay, you got the path of the sun at the very northern end, and then you've got the path of the sun at the very southern end. And here we have the summer solstice, where it rises to its highest point. And then here is the winter solstice, when it's rising in its lowest point. And here is 0 degrees of astrological latitude is right on the ecliptic. Path of the sun goes to 23 degrees and 36 minutes. So this would be north. And then it's the same south down here, okay? Whenever a planet goes outside of this normal path of the sun, it's said to be out of bounds. The moon does it a couple times a month for about 3 or 4 days at a time. Mercury is going to be doing an out of bounds journey from my birthday, July 7th, to July the 12th. What? Did you already have your birthday? Yours is early. Yeah, yours is early, right? You're Cancer 1.
Yeah, 22nd.
All right, well, happy belated birthday, my friend.
And happy early birthday.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. 22, master number. Interesting. Okay, I get it now. But the moon is traveling outside of that path of the sun, and it's kind of like a maverick. It's not really beholden to the normal expectations of the realm. So the moon may be more extreme as far as its feelings. We may have more extreme swings of emotion. We may have more issues related to the body that are outside of the normal ways that we deal with the body. When Mercury moves out of bounds, we may have discussions that are outside of the norm and things of that nature. So I really started to notice that a lot, because I noticed that I get really emotional during the moon out of bounds. I'm like, why do I feel this way? Why am I just like completely off with this? But maybe we can lean into that a little bit. So tell me, see, you're good at this, Sam. Tell me more ways to stay emotionally centered and to like let off that steam valve.
Sure. I think a lot of it is going back to studying your natal chart, because when we see a natal chart, it represents the entirety of a person. And yes, you may have major Cancer placements, which we already talked about, the caregiving side of Cancer and exercising that in a way that is healthy, but maybe you're noticing that there are other planets, other aspects in your chart that need to be fed, or your emotions are getting out of check because you've neglected these other pieces of the chart. So I think when we look at self-inventory, when we look at sensitizing during this new moon and feeling all the vulnerable parts of ourselves, parts that we've maybe sheltered or defended a little bit too much, you know,
Yeah.
and coming back into connection and softness with those parts, I think the best way to navigate some of those emotional upheavals is to be self-aware and to understand, like, oh, there is anger here that needs to be vented. Oh, there is softness here that wasn't being respected. Oh, there is a drive to create. Oh, there is a need for new love or a new definition of a relationship. Oh, my business does need to shift gears into this direction so I can feel like I'm making a difference. Finding that outlet, but the outlet that's unique to you, because one person's self-care does not look like another person's.
Right.
And especially during this time when there are so many external reasons to feel internally unstable, you need to know the terrain before you can walk the terrain. And that's a big part. But also, like, you know, one of my teachers is really fond of saying the map is not the terrain. You know, just because you're looking at your chart, understands that, you know, just because you have sun in Cancer doesn't mean you're going to do all the sun in Cancer things or feel that sun in Cancer is your only one and only placement that needs to be remediated. Instead, look at that bigger picture, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm on the fire truck route here. But, yeah, it's being able to check in with yourself. I think that's great advice. You know, being able to like have that self-awareness of when you might be getting full. You know, like right. That's a very lunar kind of thing. As we get full of light, and then sometimes it has to go somewhere. It has to be disseminated. It has to be released. Sam, we've got a few friends stopping in here that I wanted to shout out. Our Finnish friends, hello Finnish friends, are listening later in the evening, popping in and out. So I wanted to acknowledge them. Hello, Susanna and Tarja and all those folks. Laura has some good suggestions about how to have autonomy in these challenging times. So shouting Laura out here with Saturn in the fifth house. So some interesting things going on there. And yeah, I acknowledge that there's different ways to have bodily autonomy, but I think it goes deeper than that. And I want to. There are certain people that do not have the same ability to utilize these alternative methods. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to talk about it as eloquently as I want to, but I think it's more about it's very complicated, is what I will say, is there's a lot of different issues that come up with this regarding freedom. And it's not just specifically related to reproductive rights and things of that nature. So I won't dwell on that, but Urania Universe is stopping in. Portia is here today. So I wanted to shout out Portia. Portia will be joining me on August 5th to talk about the full moon in Leo. So mark your calendars for that. All right, Sam, let's see. We've gone through the out of bounds moon. We've talked about Jupiter and Aries. We've talked a little bit about Cancer 1. Here's a thought I wanted to throw out to you. One of the things that they talk a lot about in Austin Kopek's book, 36 Faces, in regards to this decan, is not only the way that the moon nurtures others, but the reciprocity between both mother and child, but also between like having to consume in order to provide. And I would like to hear your thoughts on that, as far as how the consumption and nurturing type of relationship.
Yeah, so this is something that we see a lot in a chart based on what phase somebody is in when they're born. So as an example, I have new moon in Cancer in my chart. And so when we see that the moon is dark, she is hungry, she is lacking light, she is shadowed. And that allows for a withdrawal of feeling, the inability to touch with one's own feelings, and the need to consume other people's feelings as their own to feel something. So this is manifested in my life as taking other people's opinions above my own, because it's harder to connect with what you genuinely feel sometimes, and instead to just go with the flow and let it roll off you and just say, yeah, that sounds good to me. But versus when we look at a full moon in a chart, somebody who's emotionally extroverted, somebody who has their heart on their sleeve, so to say, the idea that they are not in need as much of consumption, but instead are in need of that platform to speak, to care, to actively give of themselves. And so I think when it comes to understanding how much you need versus how much you give and where you are in that process, look at the moon phase of your chart and see how dark or how light your moon is. But just like one of the things that Cancer, this is a good one. So I don't know how many other Cancers in the chat can empathize with me over this one, but the idea that no matter how you choose to exist, your existence will always inconvenience other people. And there is no way for you not to consume, to harm, to stand in the way of, to make someone angry, which is the last thing we want. The last thing we want is to end the life of another person, another creature, another thing that we could possibly connect with. It makes us feel just sick to our stomachs thinking about the idea that we, in some cases, we think that it's selfish to consume in order to survive. And I love that idea because it does bring us into the fold of understanding that you are repurposing resources. You are not destroying without cause or without merit. You're part of the cycle, part of the lunation, and you are here for a reason, but embodying that sovereignty is a solar aspect, not a lunar aspect. And so in some cases, that moon may need to reflect more of those solar rays to fully grasp that lesson of that give and take and how appropriate it is to acknowledge the cost of the good that you do in this world.
Man, there is a lot of reflection that could be had with that statement regarding the topics that we've been talking about today. So very wise. And it, it's been reflected in just switching gears a little bit, even just like deciding what to eat, in my own journey. I've gone through different phases of like being a vegetarian, being a vegan, eating meat, and like reconciling the consumption part of that. And it's a lot to think about, but again, I love the point that you're making, is that there is a law in physics about energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And like the fact that you're talking about repurposing energy in maybe a more balanced way, that speaks to me. That feels like a really hit the nail on the head truth. And I think that that's something that we're going to have to reconcile with not only in our, with the topics that we've been talking about today with reproductive rights, but with like wealth inequality and things of that nature too, because what we're seeing is just some extremes happening that where one faction of a society, a very small faction, is taking more than their share, and like that, and causing lack for the other. So how do we repurpose and redistribute and re-equalize on that regard too? And how do we do that in our personal lives?
One of the things that also really, really great discussion about the body and cancer. And for those of you who know my work, I'm very in the medical astrology world. That's a really big part of how my astrology and my body work kind of come together. And cancer is the sign of the stomach. It is the sign of how we ingest and the delight of food and nourishing ourselves, and that first stop in the digestive process. And so cancer, in a certain way, is the sign of eating disorders. And the need to come to terms with the type of food you consume, how you choose to enjoy it, the cost of that food, and in some cases, the idea of control Capricorn, the opposite side of Cancer, is part of what fuels that need to slim, that Saturnian need to be without attachment, and in order to control and to wither oneself to the least amount of kind of standing in the wayness possible, versus Cancer, who is traditionally a little bit more full, a little bit more round, a little bit more yin or excessive at her best. And how do you find the balance between gluttony and deprivation, the idea between excess and deficiency, and how are you as a person taking into consideration, a perfect example of this is work. You could work yourself to the bone. You could put in more hours, get more money, get more cash. Now, is that worth your health, your happiness, your connections, your relationships? And is that really appropriate in the capitalist society that's just going to not feel the difference of that kind of economic impact of you starting your own business and hitting a ceiling without enslaving other people to do your work and climbing that corporate ladder? Like, how do we choose the middle ground between what we consume, how we enjoy, and the need to deprive ourselves and others of their process?
Yeah, and that's gonna, you're anticipating the full moon in Capricorn 3 and the sun being in the third decan of Capricorn, or of Cancer, because that theme is really poignant in the third decan of Cancer. Is when is enough enough? Like, how do we say no when we're full? When we've satiated ourselves. Like, I have Mercury in this decan, the third decan there, and that's been one of the challenges that I've often faced. Is I love to eat, and it's incredible that I have a very fast metabolism. That's the only reason. Yeah, that's the only reason. Like, but what I will say though is that as I get older and my metabolism starts to slow down, I've had to make different choices, and I am obsessed with being healthy. So I do eat very healthily, but I just love food. I love it, and I have to really work on saying I've had enough. Now it's time to stop. Stopping is very difficult. And I think that the point I want to make with that is a lot of that was trauma informed. Like when I was growing up, we didn't always have enough to eat. And even though like parts of my family were very affluent, I grew up with a single dad for a long period of time, and we had to stretch food. And oftentimes he would eat really fast and I'd be having to like eat really fast to compete with him to get enough food. And that, that awareness has helped me say, you know what, that's not the situation now. Like you don't have to compete for food. And it's I don't know. I just thought that that's something we're going to have to ask ourselves as a collective too, is when is enough? What is enough? When have we satiated our own desires? Then how can we share our excess, right? How can we share with people who don't have enough and whatnot? So that's something that I think we're really going to have to reconcile, that full moon energy, because that moon is going to be conjoining Pluto, and we'll get to that in a second. But it's going to really show us about the haves and the have-nots. I think one thing we have, because of our focus on just the processing the news about reproductive freedom and things of that nature, we're kind of almost ignoring the fact that we're really heading towards a really difficult, maybe recession type of energy with the lack of, with food insecurity and food prices going way up and inflation and things of that nature. So figuring out how to feed ourselves in a time period like this is a question that will be on our minds also. Do you have thoughts on that and that, how do we deal with that challenge as well?
Yeah, and I don't love it, but I love to lean back and see the astrology of it, of like all of these issues and all of these maternal rights being taken away and all of these body autonomy rights being taken away while there's a formula shortage.
Right.
And so we have all of this. And I think it comes back to the idea of like right now our stomachs are empty. And that is also the worst time to go grocery shopping, by the way. Grocery shopping as a metaphor for like choosing how to act and to choosing what to build next. You don't do that on an empty stomach, people.
No.
And right now, new moon in Cancer, our stomachs are completely empty. So love those food analogies. But I think for me, I had the opposite experience of you, Spencer, where we had plenty, but my mother attached her self-worth to her thinness, and so would skip meals and criticize our bodies. And I would see that as the norm, to be skinny, to be deprived, to feel hungry, to almost as a sense of nobility. You can't help others if you are not physically attractive. And that whole dynamic of all of those kind of toxic lessons of Cancer as well. And Cancer can be really picky and really judgy, and really conditional in its love at its worst. And right now is a time to be unconditional about. It's about the love that we give. So I think right now, although I don't want to speak too much on the full moon, but the idea of right now, like, we just need to be tapping into all of the heartstrings at this time and evaluating those sensitive points so that we can then collectively move forward with all of us instead of parts of us.
Yeah. And yeah, well, very well said. Very well said. I agree 100%. And trying to, that's something that really touches my heart as well, is people having enough to eat. I think that this is a theme with Cancer in particular. And this is a reason why, America, even they try to pretend that they're like feeding the world, like,
Yeah.
And some of it is genuine. I will say that there's some of that is genuine care, but it's been presented to us in this like savior complex type of thing. I'm thinking of all these commercials where you too could feed a child in Africa, right, or something like that, right, for 10 cents a day.
In the arms of an angel.
Right, exactly. Right. Oh my God, those cringy commercials.
So good. Like the height of the 90s guilt is,
oh my God,
in those commercials.
But how much hypocrisy is it when we can't even do it? Like, we can't even feed our own citizens and take care of our own citizens, right?
I saw somebody posted the other day from working at a food bank, working at a charity, and they were like, yeah, it's so great that you donate your cans to all of these big kind of food bank companies and all of these big kind of feeding the world companies. However, it costs more to ship those cans than it does to buy them locally. So a lot of your cans are only supposed to feed your local community, not to be shipped and moved and transported. So the idea of grassroots efforts being so important and working on your own backyard at this time, kind of that new moon internalized energy, is definitely where the vibe is.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking about that Sarah McLachlan song and how much it's used in like adopt a pet commercials.
Pity, right. Dangerous pity.
Right. And you know what? That's another thing to keep aware of with Cancerian archetypes in this new moon, is the guilt button, the guilt card that Cancer will play and play often. I am guilty. I am guilty of this.
So guilty. Emotional blackmail at its
oh my God. There's nothing like a Cancer's ability, like the mother, to like you said, that I love that word, emotional blackmail, so be aware that that's entirely possible during this period of time. And try to just, utilize that energy in a way that's more balanced. It doesn't have to be manipulative, right? Because there may be a temptation to manipulate people because of the contacts with Pluto and everything. But ultimately, what you have to do is look in the mirror and say, am I trying to manipulate this person to conform to what I want them to be so I feel safe? Or do I really care about their ultimate well-being? Do you see what I'm saying?
A lot of the toxic, guilt trippy, conditional love that Cancer gives is because of lack.
Right.
And we see this a lot. I'm reading a book right now called It Doesn't Start With You, or It Didn't Start With You, about the epigenetics of family inheritance, and people living family trauma through their genes. And one of the things that this author talks about, I'm so bad at remembering authors' names, but the idea of understanding that your personal need to influence emotionally or how you choose to be influenced emotionally by the connections around you is often due to something that is unfulfilled. So with this new moon, really sensitizing yourself to the fact of where you lack, what cups are empty. You know, those two of cups, like you can't give from an empty cup. You can't recognize the other if the other is full and you are empty and you are just one jealous mother, you know, and that being such and again, the power dynamic of you're full, I am not. You have something I do not. You are the other, and that whole back and forth of the idea. I think that investigating the conditional love of Cancer and the unconditional love that Cancer should embody is part of this discussion too.
It's funny how much we're on the wavelength here, Sam. I'm reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, I love that book for sure.
So very similar themes about how trauma can inform, you know, the way that we act and the relationships with our bodies and all of these things moving forward. So yeah, and you know, you have Mercury in Gemini, right?
Yep.
Okay, so your Mercury is working better than mine today. My Mercury in Cancer is trying to wade through like layers and layers and layers of emotion today, because I'm feeling riled up about all this stuff. So I apologize if I'm not as articulate as I would normally be. But yes, being able to. Oh, that's the point I was going to make. Oftentimes, what Cancerians will do is give to the point where now we resent the giving. And I think that it's the other thing I would say is it's important for you to practice that self-care and to take care of yourself and to you know, get what you need so that you can be a balanced giver, right? Because I think that that's one of the things that I notice about myself is if I've given past the point of where I feel comfortable, I start to get angry.
Oh yeah. Oh, the idea of hangry, the idea of you are hungry and angry because you are hungry. Also,
that's me.
Physical deficiencies. Like I've literally seen clients where they're losing hair, their nails are brittle and broken, their skin is starting to dry out, and they're like, I don't understand. I'm like, honey, when was the last time that you actually sat down to a good meal? And it's always this sob story of, oh, you know, so many things are happening and pulling me away from me. And I'm like, yeah, they are, you know, but choices, baby, choices, you know, in the moment, we need to take care of ourselves so that our shell doesn't become fragile and broken so that we can accurately go to bat for other people.
Say it louder, Sam. Say it louder. You know, say it louder.
I have these Cancer lessons I have sat with and I have cried over and I have let them beat me into a pulp over and over again. And I'm so passionate about the idea of this sign and all of the juice we can squeeze out of what it means to be cardinal water. And I think we can do that with all the signs, but obviously you should start with your own.
Absolutely. And we're getting a really nice comment from Claire, Aligning Light Astrology. It says, I want to send this whole talk to my Cancer rising, former partner, and my mother, but they are both muggles. Thank you for this validation. Yeah, it is, you know, when we recognize these archetypes in the people that we've grown up with and that have shaped our lives, you know, that's one of the really great gifts of astrology is that awareness and that clarity. And even if they don't see it, just you having that knowledge and being able to understand where they came from is so valuable. Because then what you can do is have empathy for them, you know, even if they were part of the people that created the trauma, because you understood maybe where that came from, that can start the healing process. It doesn't justify it. It doesn't mean that you subject yourself to any form of abuse, but the healing process starts somewhat from, I think, understanding and empathy and things of that nature. So I'm glad that in Lining Light's talking about showing them healthy Cancer embodiment. Well, we try. I think we're good. We're good stuff here, Sam and I hope. You know, we have our flaws for sure, but I think that one of the things that, you know, you and I talked about, Sam, is how do we hold space for us, a really suffering collective right now. And I think that was our main goal here today, and that was what we're trying to do. And you know, Claire over there is a Capricorn. So we're hopefully we're the balance over there, trying to bring harmony and balance to the force here. Okay. And oftentimes, I will say the one final thing I'll say in regards to what Claire's talking about. Oftentimes, if we have an extreme version of an archetype that we grow up with, we end up embodying the opposite.
Yeah.
And so if we had a really toxic Cancer in our life, embodying that Capricorn sense of boundary and sense of, structure can be healthy. That can be a healthy way to restore balance to your own experience. So I think that's and I'll tell you what, Claire, my daughter's a Capricorn too, so she's potentially reacting to me. So I don't know what that says about me, but I think oftentimes we have relationships like that balance us in our life, right?
I often think that astrology is the art and the science of context and interpreting that context. And I really love discussions like this, where we can kind of be like, how helpful can this be in this moment, while acknowledging like you fucked up.
Yep, exactly. And we all fall short of the glory. So I think that it's always a learning opportunity for learning and for changing and reshifting and re-alchemizing the way that you go about your life. I think that's what we have as an opportunity here too. Collectively is an opportunity to re-alchemize how we've been doing things. Pluto's bringing up the ugly underbelly, but ultimately many of the literature surrounding Pluto talks about being able to have a rebirth after the exposure to the light of the corruption that's been repressed. So that gives me a little bit of hope also.
The underworld, in addition to being a place of the dead, is also where all of the lost and buried treasure is kept. And so when we look at descending into the roots, into the underground, it is often where the pieces of ourselves that need the most tender loving care, the parts that have forgotten, the shadows that are now monsters, because of neglect, because of lack of awareness, because we've tried to shut them out, because we've tried to bury them 6 feet under. A lot of times the zombies that come into our lives that we view as monsters or enemies are actually just parts of us that are calling for healing.
Absolutely. 100%. And thank you, Remco, in the chat here for your super sticker. I appreciate your support. Okay, so Sam, let's move forward here. Let's talk a little bit. Let's just touch briefly here on the quarter moon.
Okay.
On July 6th. This is the day before my birthday. So this is pretty reflective of my solar return, actually, although the moon in my solar return is going to be right on Spica, so I'll take that. That's fine. I dig it. But we have a 14-degree Libra moon squaring the 14-degree-ish, very close to 15-degree Cancer sun. What are you thinking here as we see the unfolding of this energy and maybe the material crisis point of the lunar cycle that, like Dane Rudhyar would say?
Well, I think for me, the big thing is rulership at this time, right? So the moon is being ruled by Venus, who's still trying to have discussions in Gemini, versus Mercury, the ruler of that Venus, is being ruled by the moon. And these discussions are becoming a little bit too emotional. They're becoming a little bit jaded, would be a good way to say it. Although that Libra moon wants nothing more than to keep the peace and to find the balance and to make that trine with Venus and let everybody know that everything's going to be okay. Feelings don't go away overnight. And I think that it's just still going to be rather messy, albeit now that Mars is ducking into Taurus and starting to be ruled by that Venus and Gemini as well. I think people will be more likely to face the stubborn reality of what's in front of us, while instead of just charging ahead or kind of creating fiery passion, we're going to see a lot more of that tuning in and turning in and kind of having to deal with those emotions instead of sweeping them under the rug because they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, we're just coming off of that square with Mars and Pluto, right? Which will perfect on July the 1st. And the Mars, the big shift in energy, sorry, I didn't put this out there first, is we have Mars and Mercury moving into new signs on the 5th. And also Mercury, as you were pointing out, has a role in this conversation. On the 2nd, it trines Saturn and also squares Neptune. Okay. And then it goes under the beams the next day on the 3rd. So getting ready for that rebirth, that Kazemi moment, that new download potentially. I'm seeing another thing I'm seeing with this square. This decan is related to binding contracts and oaths. So it's a Saturn ruled decan. So it may be an awareness of all the things that we're bound to. I could see that there'd be a lot of discussions around law around this time period as well. I can't shake the thought that, and this is maybe just my wishful thinking, but if one of your branches of your government is somewhat dysfunctional, potentially another branch might be able to, this is way hopeful thinking based on what we've seen, but there's another avenue through legislation to restore some of the rights that people have been stripped of.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of rewriting laws while there's an air trine with the moon and Venus. I think that's lovely, for sure.
Yeah, and Venus is on a fixed star called Rigel. So this is a really exploring many different options. This is the first step towards humility, actually, with that fixed star was in the foot of Orion, stepping into the river Eridanus as he kind of shifts his journey towards the constellation Hercules, which was the kneeling one, learning from experience. So maybe this is a first step into that direction. I don't know if it's like everything's solved by now. Absolutely not. But
yeah, I don't think so.
But maybe it's a first step in that direction.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so as we move forward through and just kind of get to our full moon here, we are going to see on the next day, happy birthday to Spencer on July 7th. Birthdays have been weird lately. I don't know. It's always a strange experience. But the one thing I did want to point out here is that we've been talking a little bit about the out of bounds things, but this is when Mercury starts heading out of bounds. So maybe the discussions that we have around legislation or finding balance and restoring harmony leads to some talk that is outside the norm, and maybe some solutions that are outside the norm. To me, Mercury is a planet that questions. So when it's out of bounds and in Cancer, to me, that's asking the question of like, how do we nurture ourselves? What will support us? And maybe we have to think outside the box with this on some level as well. And then in the 9th, okay, we're rounding the corner here. On the 9th, there is a square between Mercury and Jupiter. Any advice for that little square that we're seeing?
I think this is going to be more mental friction over what already occurred, because Mercury's under the beam, so is not necessarily in the forefront, is more in the shadows, and it's more just this kind of doubling down on like, I have been wronged, I have been made vulnerable, we shouldn't have to do this. Right. And that type of friction, which I mean is already in the collective space, but I think it's just new layers of that onion kind of unfolding and making us tear up again.
Well, and the moon will be out of bounds again on the 10th through the 14th. So get ready to feel your feelings after that Mercury Jupiter square. And then as we move towards the full moon on the 13th, we have two aspects here. We have Venus trining Saturn from 25 or 24 degrees of Gemini and Aquarius. And then I'll go straight to the lunation here so you all could see it. There it is. And the full moon will be happening at 21 degrees of Cancer and Capricorn respectively. Sorry. Any quick thoughts on this full moon as how this new moon cycle may come to fruition?
Unfortunately, because Mercury is still behind the sun, there's going to be a loss for words. Actions are going to be more important because Capricorn is a very kind of tangible, grounded energy. So we really need to understand that slow and steady wins the race. little bite. How do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. With Saturn being retrograde in Aquarius, it's going to be seeing the bigger picture here and really embodying that kind of like, you can't rile me up at this stage because I am all out of feelings and I am all about doing. And in some ways, it will be very unconscious thought that's motivating us at this point. So I think as the moon kind of takes over and puppets us towards the actions and those initial stages of planting seeds, it's really going to be waiting for that Mercury cazimi that I think we see the insights truly rolling in, and the aha moment starting to collect and codify.
Yeah, I agree. I think one other thing to keep an eye out for this is that third decan of Capricorn shows a figure that's kind of hoarding resources. So we talked about Hesed, and in the earthly realm, Hesed is like, trying to block manifestation by hoarding them and saying what is enough physically. I think there could be also impulses to try to hoard resources around this period of time. And it may be through feeling a scarcity that we see through the sun in Cancer 3 as well. So be real careful about that impulse, because that could lead to some Plutonic energy as well, with the moon applying to Pluto here, and Pluto opposing the sun. I've seen some weird things happen with the sun and Pluto in particular. A few summers ago, that aspect reflected some of the crackdown on protesting in Portland, and the unmarked vehicle protests, kidnapping of protesters and things like that. So
can you go forward to that Sun-Pluto opposition?
Yeah, let's take a look.
Because I'm sure it's right by the cazimi.
Yeah,
right
exactly.
by it.
Yep.
So tasty.
Right.
And this is what we're talking about. Revelation coming to light, the mind and emotion starting to align with the ego. And then as we choose to act, who is there to greet us but our past? Right. And the opposition that creates. And I think that, although it will be during a time where we'll see that trine to Neptune as well, some people will just literally choose to get stoned about it,
Right.
and just kind of transcend through addiction and other methods of kind of escapism. Other people will be kind of hitting those walls head on and just being like, how can I take care of myself and others in the midst of such a kind of backwards oppressive structure?
Absolutely. And the temptation to just melt into the couch in a purple haze of smoke is definitely, I understand that. That's always been my experience of Neptune, is just melting into a puddle when there's been sort of aspects with that. But I would encourage those of you out there, like, take care of yourself, do what you need to do to release some of the anxiety, but then get clarity again. If you get lost in that escapism, what that does is that codifies the oppressor on some level, because they've already won if you've given up. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know.
But again, the idea of meeting the challenge head on, I don't think is the go-to. I think sidestepping into the watery elements and connecting, feeling, engaging emotionally, spiritually, even kind of that hex the patriarchy type of vibe, where it's connecting to your higher powers, connecting with the people in your own backyard, love as opposed to kind of opposition, and choosing that kind of softer, more yin realm, because water always finds the path of least resistance. So if you're finding that resistance being too much of an obstacle, sidestep it, and instead let your actions carry you around the obstacle.
In true Cancerian form, right? I mean, those crabs go sideways, backwards. I mean, we're rarely direct. Like this conversation today has been an exercise in skirting around things directly. I think we've done pretty well. I'm learning how to be more forward about things, and not have to be like, will this offend this person? You know what I mean? But I think that Sam and I have been pretty clear today on where we stand with some of this stuff, I think, right? As far as like, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words now. I'm going to move forward here to the, sorry. This has been amazing, Sam. I'm running out of steam here today.
It's okay.
It's a weekend. Usually the weekends I'm kind of like, oh, my brain checks out. I feel like I'm on the couch with that I'm got that Mercury Cazimi trine Neptune in my brain already.
Yeah.
And we're getting to the point where Spencer's his food tank is getting low.
For sure. So let's go ahead and it's been a pleasure to be on the couch with you today.
Yes, my friend as well. It is always a pleasure. So let's power through to the end here. Sure. And thank you all who have been in the chat today too. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate all of your comments. Sam and I have been really focused on what we've been doing today, but I see your comments and I acknowledge all of the wonderful contributions that you have here in the chat. And thank you so much for that participation. The animal that we have today is the jellyfish. I thought that was a pretty appropriate. And I actually saw one in my Instagram feed. I sent this to Sam before we got him. I'm like, look there it is. Like animals and synthesizers, like these just little, I don't know, what are they, man of wars or whatever? Medusa. Yeah. Some of them are literally called Medusa, right? Yeah, excellent. But some of the themes around jellyfish, first of all, many of them don't have brains. So this could reflect, I think, maybe getting out of our head, getting into our heart, and maybe flowing with things. Stop forcing things, going with the current, the flow. They also are able to reproduce themselves after maybe sustaining an injury. So maybe going back to the beginning, going back to our roots, right? Go back to that polyp stage and finding out what is seminal and what is important. Mm-hmm. Returning to relaxation after stress. This is something that really resonated with me because just if you've ever been to one of those big jellyfish tanks, just watching them just float around, it's very relaxing. It's very like, oh, there's peace, right? And faith during trying times was another theme that they talked about in my research on the jellyfish. What do you think about the jellyfish as a symbol and how that might be speaking to us here?
I normally associate the jellyfish with Pisces because of how permeable it is, but I love its association with Cancer because at the end of the day, there are very dangerous jellyfish, and there's that cardinal kind of thorn barb of Cancer kind of coming through with its mama bear need to protect, acquire, and defend its own interests.
They sting, the stingers, right? Yeah.
Fun fact about jellyfish is that there are several species that will make their homes inside of the jellyfish as a sort of symbiosis. And it's also an asexual reproducer. So when we find the idea of sexuality being just like everything else, the jellyfish does is ambiguous slightly, but it is still kind of this half in, half out, kind of blurry, one with the ocean, but still its own entity, yet still self-sufficient, still kind of gently propelling forward. But if you run into it, it's your own damn fault, type of.
So you're in Florida, right? You've had experience with this. Yeah.
Lots.
They're painful. Like
they are so painful. They are nasty.
So I think there's symbolism there too of like running into our own pain also, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it seems like this innocuous thing floating around, but if you get tangled up in it, it's it's paralyzing. So I think go ahead. Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to say in terms of the animal, although I like the jellyfish, I also mentioned this earlier when we were chatting, the idea of the crab molting its shell and becoming soft and vulnerable as also a really good kind of metaphor for that jellyfish-like structure where you need to kind of protect yourself during that time of softness and vulnerability, but at the same time understanding that hardness will return, and that defense will start to kind of repopulate after the new moon when we get more into the hardness of Capricorn.
Absolutely. I've stepped on a few jellyfish. My mom and I used to spend some time in the Florida Keys, and they have those little blue what are they, man of wars or
Man of
whatever?
Wars.
Yeah, they're everywhere, and you step on one of those on accident, and you're like, oh boy, that's quite a bunch of pain. But I wanted to thank Tarya and Lynn for the super stickers. Thank you so much for your support. Very much appreciate you. High five to you as well, and thank you for supporting the show here, and thank you for all these wonderful comments. We've got one more divinatory piece for you before we wrap for the day, and that's the I-Ching. And the I-Ching that I pulled for today was number 11, and it was moving to number 57. Number 11 roughly translates to peace, harmony, smoothly flowing, a lot of these jellyfish themes we were talking about, prosperity, the union of high and low, and potentially things going well. This, we were talking about this hexagram earlier. It actually is a very balanced hexagram. It's about balance. It has 3 yin lines and 3 yang lines. So it is perfectly balanced of heaven and earth, above and below, and things of that nature. And we were talking a little bit about sometimes to create peace, you have to in a yin way, you have to take yang action, right? Talk a little bit more about that concept with this.
I loved how you put it, because often when we think of like peace and relaxation times, we think of letting go, but it takes effort to create that peace. And back to the idea of gardening, like anybody who knows, you have to be constantly vigilant about your garden to ensure that harvest. So although like enjoying the cornucopia of benefits that you will eventually receive, it takes a lot of work to kind of foster and nurture that peace.
Absolutely. And that's some of that is reflected in the 3 lines that we had changing here. And I'll read them. Line number 1 says, when, excuse me, when reeds of grass are pulled up, other roots of the same kind come with them. To set forth brings good fortune. So this line really reflects potentially working together for the common good, having some kind of sound plan, deciding on a worthy goal and mobilizing towards it. This is something that I think Sam and I have been kind of pointing towards throughout our talk today, is that, you know, to be able to work together with our local communities is really important, especially in these times where the macrocosm is challenging. Line number 5 says, the sovereign Yi gives his daughter in marriage. This brings blessings and supreme good fortune. Now this line is about giving support, but through modesty and humility. And I've been utilizing this quote about modesty and letting go of arrogance on this channel regarding the hexagram number 15, humility. But they talk about modesty not necessarily in the traditional Christian way of like maybe potentially meekness, but related more about modesty is not seeing your ego as more important than the work itself, and being able to surrender to what is necessary to get the higher purpose done. That is the modest way of going about things. I think that really speaks to me with this particular changing line, because the work that needs to be done now needs to be, it's more important than you. It's a collective action, but you do need to take care of yourself and make sure that your vehicle, your vessel is strong to be able to endure and go the distance with things like this.
That humanness, that humility.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So reaching out in the spirit of service will win support was another thing that I wrote down with that line. And then the final line really, I think, reflects the interesting nature of the I-Ching. It never really fails to, I never fail to find truth with it. And this is line number 6. It says, the city walls fall back into the moat. Use no army now. Issue commands only within your own city. Perseverance brings humiliation. So to me, this is, they reflected on a time of peace and harmony actually nearing the end. Like, this is what you learn in Taoist philosophy, is that every extreme has the seed of its opposite planted, right? So if we've been experiencing a peaceful time, the seed of unrest and chaos and decay is planted within that. And that needs to be accepted as part of the cycle. That doesn't mean we don't do anything, but it is part of the natural way of things, right? So there's always going to be times of peace, and that sometimes those are going to give way to times of challenge. And we're seeing a period of decline. I mean, we're heading towards an election cycle, which I always fear now. Like, I always get anxious about it. Although I'm grateful that we still have elections, and we're probably going to have to do a lot more work to ensure that we are able to have those free elections moving forward. So that is another part of our work. But it's difficult fighting the laws of change. And I wrote down in my notes, violent opposition is the wrong strategy in the times of decay. It only exhausts your resources and can lead to humiliation. And I think that reflects what we've been talking about the challenge between the Aries placements and the Cancerian placements. It says the wise fisherman stays safely in port when there is a storm. Cultivate, right? So yeah, that was a great one to me. Which again, it does not mean just not doing anything. Yeah. It means that for the purpose of self-preservation, like I was talking about earlier, you're going to have to be somewhat indirect about this as well. There's going to have to be, we're going to have to tackle this issue from multiple different perspectives and to endure. So to withstand stagnation, it's important to exercise self-control and strengthen the ties with your inner circle. I think we've been preaching that today, is when you can't trust the macrocosm, the system, that's when things become localized, and that you really like take care of your neighbor. You make sure that people have enough to eat in these periods of lack. You check in on your, the elderly neighbors that you have that, I don't know if they're, I was talking about heat waves that were coming potentially, and checking in on people if they have, an ability to stay cool and things like that. So all of those things can lead to good outcomes. Anything that sticks out to you with these changing lines before we talk about the last hexagram here?
The image with the reeds being pulled up, I love the idea of the dandelion seeds scattering as well, kind of spreading the message, spreading the seeds. And then I love the idea of just the individual pushes of hostility, like you don't fight fire with fire. That's not what we should do here. Instead, it's rest, it's cultivation. Like the storm analogy, now is the time for you as the fisher person to be mending your nets, networking with other people at the market to make sure everybody else is safe as well, to be doing good deeds when you're in your off time, and that builds community and that builds a stronger business. If you work all the time or try to push yourself when the iron is not hot to strike, like you will eventually be wearing yourself out.
Well, that takes back power, doesn't it? Right? Yeah. When we feel disempowered by the systems that are supposed to support us, we have to take that back and be that support system for each other. So, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. The last hexagram that we have here is number 57. It's called gentle influence, compliance, humility, gentleness, penetrating. It's related to the wind and the persistence of wind, how wind just gently blows but continues to blow. It is touching every part of the landscape. So as we've been talking about today, a persistence is going to have to be taken on to make necessary changes in the collective and the community. This is like gathering up signatures on geez, my brain is not working today. Sorry, Sam. Running out of steam. Petitions, right? Like to get things on the ballot if in your particular state that is up for debate. Like in Michigan, like people were collecting signatures for codifying reproductive rights in the state constitution rather than the national one. So there may be some things where we have to kind of be persistent with this over time. Cancer season, gentleness wins out. Kindness, I think, can win out. Like we can envelop people with the kindness that we have and with our emotional support as well. Any other things to add to that as we wrap up here?
Well, I think one of the things that I saw was like a lot of people are talking about how politicians right now are bringing poems to a gunfight. And I think that although that is an accurate analogy, and although you can't fight that kind of aggression with the certain level of kindness, you can redirect that kindness to bolster and network with systems of support that are stronger in the long run. So again, it's about playing the tortoise game, not the hare game, and that type of that type of energy that is more collective and stable and steady and steadfast.
Absolutely. Very well said. Well, Sam, this has been a pleasure. Always enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you for carrying me today.
Not at all.
You know, I don't. Is Mercury under the beams right now? I think it is right now as well. So, but thank you all for joining us today. Make sure that you find Sam at sambelyea.com, correct? And Sam has a really interesting gardening class where he's going to take you through the signs and take you through some of the, I mean, you can speak about it once more if you want. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, it's just a magical gardening growing through the zodiac online class where we'll be cultivating understanding of ourselves and the planets and the land through a more hands-on approach, and in some ways magical and astrological approach to kind of everyday green thumbing.
Nice. And when does that start?
That starts beginning of January. So registration is open. I have the link on Facebook, as well as if you're interested, just message me and I'll send it to you directly.
Perfect. Okay, so support Sam, sign up for the class. You can also sign up for the Decans of Cancer webinar that's going to be happening on July the 16th. I would love to see all of you there. Once again, thank you all for your support today. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the newsletter, whatever you can do. And most of all, in these times, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to one another. We'll get through this as a community. So that's what I've got for you, my friends. Have a good one today, and we'll see you later. Peace.